Usually, thieves rob banks, either by sneaking in through a tunnel or walking in through the main gate and holding people hostage. But in this story, the thieves broke into two different houses to rob the bank. It was such a unique robbery method in which not a single bullet was fired. No one was injured. The gang of thieves silently and quietly took away $30 million. After that, these thieves disappeared forever. However, the police investigated in every possible way and tried every trick to catch this gang. But they were never caught. So, let's move toward a story where a perfect robbery took place. And an excellent investigation went on for 20 years. But in this game, between thieves and police, the thieves won, and the police lost. The story began on the night of December 19, 2004, when there was a knock at the door of a man named Kevin McMullen's house. Kevin was a manager at the Northern Bank in Ireland, and as soon as he opened the door, he saw two men standing outside dressed in police uniforms. One of these two men told Kevin that one of his relatives had met with an accident, and that he would have to come with them to identify the body. Hearing this, Kevin panicked, and just as he stepped out of the house, that man pressed a gun to the back of his head, while the other man standing beside him entered the house and covered the mouth of Kevin's wife, Karen, so that she could not scream. About 20 kilometers away from Kevin's house, a similar incident was happening in another house, where Chris and his entire family were taken hostage. Chris was also an employee of the same Northern Bank, and he stood helplessly, watching everything, because his whole family was being held at gunpoint. After taking everyone hostage, kidnappers told Chris to quietly follow their orders, or else they would kill his family. Kevin and Chris were completely unaware that in the next 24 hours, they were going to become part of a plan that would shake all of Britain, and that they themselves would help execute the biggest. The night of December 19, 2004, Chris Ward was sitting at his home in Belfast, watching a football match with his parents and girlfriend. Just then, there was a knock at the door, and when he opened it, the man outside told him he had come to talk about Celtic. Celtic is a football club in Ireland, and it was Chris's favorite, which is why he was part of a group that supported this club. Because of being a member of this group, people often came to his house to ask about tickets and matches. And seeing the man at the door this time, he thought the same, that maybe he had come for tickets, and that was his biggest mistake. Chris let the man at the door inside, and as soon as he turned around, two more men entered the house, and from that moment on, everything changed. The three men immediately pulled out their guns and pointed them at Chris and his family, telling them they had not come to talk. It's about football, but about his cashier job at the Northern Bank. The kidnappers also said they knew everything about him, and that for the next 24 hours, he would have to do exactly as they said, while his family would be kept hostage in that house. Continuing, the second kidnapper told him to put on his uniform and quietly step outside and get into the car waiting outside. Chris did exactly as he was told, and when he stepped out, the car was there with its engine running and the door open. He was told to lie down on the back seat. In the front seat was a driver holding a gun in one hand. The same thing happened with Northern Bank manager Kevin. He and his wife Karen were watching TV at home when there was a knock at the door. Opening it, he saw two policemen standing there, telling him about the accident, and then everything happened exactly as I already told you. After Karen's mouth was covered, she saw a third man enter the house. Three kidnappers took Kevin and his wife to their bedroom, turned their faces toward the wall, pointed guns at their heads. One of the kidnappers told Kevin to forget that he was a bank manager for now, and just remember that he needed to save his wife. Meanwhile, the other two kidnappers searched every corner of the house to ensure no fingerprints were left. An hour later, one of them told Karen that she would be moved to another house where a woman would take care of her. Karen's eyes were then blindfolded, and the kidnappers took her outside and placed her in a waiting car, while Kevin stood there helplessly watching. After the kidnappings at both locations, Karen was taken away, and Kevin had no idea that the same had happened to his bank's cashier, Chris. A little while later, a car stopped outside Kevin's house. Chris was brought out of it and kept hostage with Kevin inside the same house. Now, both Kevin and Chris's hands were tied, and they were locked in the kitchen in darkness, so they could not even see each other's faces clearly. One kidnapper told them to cooperate if they wanted their families to remain safe, and if they didn't, their families would be killed. He went on to say they were going to rob the Northern Bank, and both Kevin and Chris would have to help them by following the instructions they would be given. The kidnappers threatened that they would have to do exactly as told, and even one mistake would cost their families' lives. After hearing this, Kevin realized the situation was extremely serious, and that this was not only a kidnapping, but also a bank robbery plot in which he and Chris were going to play a part. After kidnapping Kevin and Chris's families, the first stage of the plan was complete, and now they began the next part of their plan. These kidnappings are also called tiger kidnappings. And for Northern Ireland, this was nothing new. In tiger kidnappings, two crimes are involved first. Someone important is kidnapped, and then they are forced to commit a crime while being held hostage. Tiger robberies are a very common tactic used by organized crime groups, still sometimes used in Ireland to rob banks and even homes. To counter such tiger robberies, Northern Bank had come up with a solution a few years before this robbery. They had installed a security feature in their deposit vault that required two people to open the vault door. It could not be opened by just one person. The door opened with a password, and both people needed to be present at the same time. To unlock it, this password and the two people authorized to open the vault changed every day, and the next days to authorize people, the names were Chris and Kevin. Locked in the kitchen, Kevin and Chris were waiting for further instructions when a man came inside and handed each of them a mobile phone. On the back of these two phones were written the initials K and C for Kevin and Chris. And in both these phones there was only one number saved, a number that would later change the whole story. After handing them the phones, this man told Kevin and Chris to sit on the sofa and then began explaining his plan to them. And the man explaining the plan was none other than the gang leader himself, who was holding a knife in his hand. The rest of the gang members communicated only through signals. Anyway, the gang leader, while explaining his plan, told them what, when, and how they had to do things, repeatedly reminding them that if they didn't obey him, their families could suffer the consequences. According to trial records, this conversation lasted for several hours. The kidnappers knew every single detail about the bank, such as the employees, and exactly when the security shift changed, continuing with his instructions. The gang leader told Kevin and Chris that they had to go to the bank as usual and behave completely normally while doing their work. While working, they had to go down to the basement vault and take out 1.3 million United States dollars in cash, put it into the bag they would be given, and then place this bag near a bus stop. After placing the bag, they were to return to the bank and trigger the alarm. But during this entire time, they had to keep the mobile phones they were given switched on continuously. The reason for keeping the phones on was that the kidnappers would tell them the next step only when they were inside the bank, and also because they feared Kevin and Chris might inform the police, which could get them caught. The way the gang leader was speaking terrified Kevin and Chris, and they quietly agreed to do everything he said. By now, it was around 2 a.m., and the gang leader told them to get some sleep because tomorrow would be a big day for them. The next morning, at 11 a.m., Kevin and Chris sat in a car and headed towards the bank because Chris's shift started. At 11:30 a.m., and Kevin's at 12 p.m. on normal days, when it wasn't Chris's turn to open the vault, he worked as a supervisor at the bank, where he handled the transfer of banknotes to other banks and ATMs. Every day, several million USD would pass through his hands. But today was different. With Christmas only 5 days away, there was much more cash moving in and out of banks. Anyway, Kevin and Chris entered the bank, behaving normally, and sat for a while in Kevin's cabin. They spent time there because, according to the plan, they were to start the robbery at exactly 5 p.m., but before that, Kevin and Chris had to call the kidnappers 3 times. The purpose of these 3 calls was for the kidnappers to confirm that everything was fine, and also to keep threatening Kevin and Chris, reminding them that if anything went wrong, their families would pay the price. Around 4:30 p.m., Kevin told the bank staff that there was some discrepancy in the cash balance and that he and Chris would have to count all the cash themselves. After that, all the staff were sent home early. Now, in the entire bank, only Kevin, Chris, and 2 security guards were present. Half an hour later, at exactly 5 p.m., the two began the heist. They first moved towards the underground basement where the vault was. After entering the password on the keypad, they went inside the vault. This vault was completely filled with cash, containing not only USD, but also euros and pounds. They went straight to the green boxes containing freshly printed USD bills. These green boxes were sealed with metal security seals, and the gang leader had given Kevin and Chris special instructions to replace these metal seals with white plastic seals. The reason for this would be revealed later in the story anyway. Kevin also knew about a blind spot inside the vault where he could fill the cash into the bag without being caught on camera. They took a green box from the shelf and went to that blind spot, filling the bag given to them by the kidnappers with USD. 1.3 million in $50 and $100 bills. It took them about 15 minutes to fill the bag, after which Chris immediately picked it up and walked out of the vault. Since there was no one else in the bank, his path was completely clear. Now Chris had to make one last call to the kidnappers to find out where he had to take the bag. After speaking with them, he left the bank and went to a bus stop a short distance away, where he placed the bag and waited. In just 3 minutes, a car stopped near him, without asking any questions. Chris handed the bag to the man inside and quietly returned to the bank. The last job left for Kevin and Chris was to trigger the bank alarm and return home. But they had no idea that a huge conspiracy was waiting for them. On his way back to the bank, Chris was happy, thinking that he would now be able to meet his family, when suddenly his mobile phone rang. On the other end was the gang leader, who told Chris that he had done exactly as instructed. Chris then asked, "Now what?" And the reply he got made his blood run cold. The gang leader told Chris to go back into the vault and take out all the remaining cash. Hearing this, Chris realized that this robbery was going to happen in several stages, and that this was only the beginning. Shocked, Chris asked how much more cash he had to take, and the reply came, "All of it, every single dollar kept." Inside the bank? Before moving further into the story, we need to understand how all this cash was delivered to the Northern Bank. For that, the bank's rear entrance was used, which opened into an alley leading directly to Wellington Street. This was the alley through which every banknote entered and left the bank. The responsibility of bringing and taking this cash had been given to a company named Secure Ltd. The thieves' plan was to first park a van in that alley and then escape, with the green boxes full of cash. But the biggest question was, how would they manage this? As you know, while taking out the cash, Kevin and Chris had replaced the metal seals with white plastic seals. The reason behind this was that if a cash box had a white plastic seal, it meant the box contained not cash but waste paper. The second part of the thieves' plan was to take these boxes out through the rear entrance, pretending they were waste boxes. There a white van would be waiting, but the biggest obstacle was that only Secure Limited had permission to bring a van into that alley, and the van had to be driven by a verified employee with an official ID. When Chris told the gang leader that taking the boxes out of the bank carrying cash was impossible, then the gang leader said, "You run the bank. If you want to see your family alive, get the cash out by any means necessary." As soon as the call ended, Chris re-entered the bank and went straight to the vault, where the green boxes were kept. There were a total of 30 boxes in the world, each containing $1 million in cassia, massive amount that had to be taken out of the bank without. Anyone noticing now? Kevin and Chris began placing 6 boxes each into 5 trolleys, and then proceeded to wheel them out of the vault one by one. Passing through the hall and near the security control room, where 27 cameras were recording everything, before moving the boxes out, Kevin needed a clear exit. So, he went into the control room and told the security guard, Billy, that a van would arrive in the back alley to pick up boxes filled with waste paper, and asked him to open the rear entrance gate. Billy, suspecting nothing, opened the gate. However, as per security protocol, he accompanied them to the gate. Now, their path was completely clear. Kevin pushed the first trolley out into the alley, while Chris separately called the gang leader, informing him that all the boxes were outside in the alley and that he should bring the van. Within just 15 minutes, a white van arrived in reverse gear and parked right next to the bank's gate. As soon as the van parked, its rear door opened and two men stepped out. Now, guard Billy, Kevin, and Chris stood facing these two men, who were about to take all the cash. The two men began loading the boxes into the van, and within just 7 minutes, all 30 boxes worth $30 million were loaded. After loading the boxes, one of the thieves called Chris over and handed him a roll of black polythene bags. The reason behind this was that they were coming back to execute the final phase of the heist. Kevin and Chris re-entered the vault, and just then, Kevin received a call from the gang leader, instructing him to fill the black polythene bags with the dollars and euros stored inside the vault in the first two phases of the heist. The thieves had stolen newly printed pounds, and in the third phase, they took used banknotes, dollars, and euros. About 45 minutes later, the van returned and parked outside again. Guard Billy called Kevin to inform him that the van had arrived, increasing Kevin's anxiety. This time, they didn't have boxes to hide the cash, only black polythene bags containing millions in dollars and euros. Kevin asked Billy to open the rear gate again, but he was terrified that if Billy checked the bags, their entire operation would be ruined. Chris and Kevin placed the bags on trolleys and wheeled them toward the rear gate where Billy was waiting. Surprisingly, Billy didn't inspect the bags. Once again, two men stepped out of the van and quickly loaded the polythene bags inside. Billy remained unaware that cash was being stolen right under his nose. After loading the last bag, one of the thieves looked at Kevin and Chris and said, "Now you too can leave." And with that, the biggest bank robbery in all of Ireland had been successfully executed. The two were supposed to trigger the bank's alarm to make it seem like they had no involvement in the robbery. Then they got into a car and drove to Kevin's house to reunite with his family. Around 8:10 p.m., Kevin called the police station, claiming that a gang had kidnapped his family and forced him to rob the bank. However, the police had already been alerted about the robbery earlier. A couple passing by the alley where the white van was parked sensed something suspicious and decided to report it. They spotted a traffic police officer and informed him, who then relayed the information to the police. But by the time the call reached them, the van had already left. When the police arrived at the bank for investigation, they were stunned. $30 million had vanished. A massive search operation was launched across the island, turning this into one of the most complex cases for the police department. Months later, police arrested some criminals in hopes of tracing the thieves. Two men were detained at Euston Station in Dublin. One was found with 100,000 euros hidden inside a washing powder box, while the other was accused of burning banknotes behind his house. This second man was none other than bank manager Kevin McMillan, who was burning the money given to him by the thieves who had forced him to rob the bank. Since the police already suspected an inside job due to how smoothly the robbery was executed, they arrested Kevin, one of the two people with access to the vault. For an entire year, Kevin remained in jail, accused of aiding the thieves in the UK's biggest bank robbery. However, after a year of interrogation and investigation, the police found no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, no suspicious calls from his phone, no footage of him moving the cash, and he was eventually released. The police then turned their attention to Chris, who had been inside the bank with Kevin during the robbery and had scheduled their shifts to access the vault. On January 29, 2006, Chris was also arrested on suspicion of aiding the thieves. His house was searched, but again, no evidence was found to prove his involvement. Though Chris was brought to trial, prosecution had no solid proof to establish that he had deliberately scheduled his and Kevin's shifts. Eventually, he too was released. The police conducted raids at 22 locations and arrested 13 people, but none were directly linked to the robbery. The stolen money was never recovered, and the thieves vanished without a trace. Both Kevin's and Chris's families were released unharmed after the heist. Chris's family had been held captive inside his own home, while Kevin's wife was locked in a deserted forest. cabin with no guard, contrary to the thieves' promise that a woman would watch over her. The criminals also burned Kevin's car. To eliminate any evidence, the Northern bank robbery wasn't just a theft hit, it was a slap in the face of law enforcement. $30 million was stolen. Families were taken hostage and 2 bank employees were forced to rob their own bank. Yet the thieves disappeared forever. The police had one job to find the man. They failed miserably. To this day, the case remains unsolved. How did you find this story? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.